The tribunal chamber filled with the low growls and clicking sounds of the Galactic Council's most feared species. Ambassador Vex'Tai stood in the center, her massive form casting shadows across the metal floor. Her 6 arms remained bound in energy restraints that hummed with dangerous power. The Krillion's natural armor plating, evolved over millions of years for hunting the deadliest prey across a dozen worlds, gleamed under the harsh lights. Around her, representatives from 47 different species watched with a mixture of fear and disgust. The ethereal ones floated in their containment spheres, their telepathic whispers creating an uncomfortable buzz in the air. The insectoid hive queens clicked their mandibles in disapproval, while the crystalline beings from the outer rim pulsed with angry red light. "You stand accused of the highest crime against galactic order," announced High Arbiter Zephyrian, his voice echoing through multiple translation devices, forming emotional bonds with the species designated as Prey Class Alpha. The humans. Vex'Tai's 4 eyes focused on the Arbiter, her predatory gaze unwavering. In her species' culture, direct eye contact was a challenge, a promise of violence. But today it carried something else entirely. Defiance born not of aggression, but of conviction. "The evidence is overwhelming," continued another council member, a slug-like creature whose species had been terrorized by humans in their first contact war 300 years ago. "Video recordings show you protecting human civilians during the Proxima raid. Witness testimony confirms you refused direct orders to eliminate human prisoners. Most damning of all, you were observed engaging in what can only be described as affectionate behavior." The word affectionate was spat out like poison. In the galactic community, predators did not show affection to prey. It violated the natural order that had governed interspecies relations for millennia. The strong dominated the weak, the hunters consumed the hunted. This was the foundation of galactic civilization. Vex'Tai's mind drifted to her first encounter with humans 6 months ago. She had been leading a standard enforcement mission on a human colony world. Her job was simple: remove the human presence and claim the planet for the hegemony. She expected the usual pattern. Humans would fight desperately, show their famous courage and ingenuity, but ultimately fall to superior firepower and numbers. Instead, she found something that changed everything. During the battle, a small human child had become separated from her family. The girl, no more than 6 standard years old, had hidden in a destroyed building while explosions rocked the settlement around her. When Vex'Tai discovered the child, protocol demanded immediate elimination. Humans were classified as a galactic threat due to their unpredictable nature and rapid technological advancement. But the child had looked up at her without fear. Instead, the little girl had reached out with tiny hands and touched Vex'Tai's armored face. In that moment, something ancient and buried deep within the Krillian predator awakened. For the first time in her 300 years of life, Vex'Tai felt something other than the thrill of the hunt. "The defendant will address the charges," the Arbiter commanded. Pulling Vex'Tai back to the present, she straightened to her full height, towering over most of the council members. Her voice, when it came, was steady and clear. "I do not deny the accusations. I protected humans. I refused to kill them. And yes, I formed emotional connections with members of their species." Gasps and outraged sounds filled the chamber. Several representatives began shouting demands for immediate execution. The Hive Queen's clicking reached a fever pitch of fury. However, Vex'Tai continued, her voice cutting through the chaos. "I challenge the assumption that this makes me a criminal. For 3 million years, our species have followed the doctrine of predator supremacy. We have built our civilization on the belief that might makes right, that the strong are justified in dominating the weak. But what if we are wrong?" The chamber fell silent. The question hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. "What if," Vex'Tai pressed on, "the humans represent something we have never encountered before? Not prey to be consumed, but partners to learn from? What if our ancient ways are not laws of nature, but choices we can unmake?" High Arbiter Zephyrian's expression darkened. "You speak heresy. The natural order cannot be questioned. Predators hunt, prey flees or dies. This has been the way since the first species reached for the stars. And look where it has brought us," Vex'Tai replied. "Endless wars. Entire species enslaved or extinct. A galaxy built on fear and domination. Perhaps it is time for a new way." The energy restraints around her arms pulsed brighter as security forces prepared for violence. But Vex'Tai remained still. Her challenge issued not through threat of force, but through the power of an idea that terrified the Council more than any weapon. The trial that would determine not just her fate, but possibly the future of galactic civilization, was about to begin. 3 days before the trial began, Captain Sarah Chen received the most unusual message of her diplomatic career. The transmission came through encrypted channels, bearing the official seal of the Galactic Council but requesting something that violated every protocol in the book. "They want me to testify?" Sarah asked her aide, reading the message for the 3rd time. "At the trial of a Krillian predator." Lieutenant James Rodriguez nodded grimly. "According to intelligence reports, this Vextai character is being charged with war crimes for refusing to kill human civilians. The Council wants testimony about human military capabilities and psychological profiles." Sarah stared out the viewport of the diplomatic station orbiting Kepler 442b. Earth's newest colony world stretched below them, green and blue and alive with possibility. It had taken humanity 400 years to reach the stars, and only 50 more to claim a dozen worlds of their own. But they remained the newcomers in a galaxy dominated by species that had been traveling between stars for millions of years. "There's something else," Rodriguez continued. "Our sources suggest this isn't really about war crimes. The Council is using this trial to send a message about humanity's place in the galactic order." The message was clear enough. Humans were still considered prey by most galactic species. Their classification had been debated for centuries since first contact, but the consensus remained unchanged. Humans were dangerous prey, clever, resourceful, and unpredictable, but prey nonetheless. Any predator species that treated them as equals faced severe consequences. Sarah had seen the recordings from the Proxima incident. The footage showed Vextai's forces overwhelming the human settlement with typical Krillian efficiency. But then something extraordinary happened. When human civilians began evacuating, several Krillian soldiers moved to intercept and eliminate them according to standard protocol. Vextai had countermanded those orders. The most startling moment came when a human child became separated during the chaos. Vextai herself had approached the girl, and instead of eliminating the threat, she had gently guided the child to safety. The predator's massive clawed hands, designed for tearing through armor and bone, had touched the little girl with impossible tenderness. "I need to understand something," Sarah said finally. "What exactly are we dealing with here?" The reports described Krillians as apex predators, but this Vextai acted more like a protector. Rodriguez pulled up the xenobiology files on his tablet. Krillians are fascinating from an evolutionary standpoint. They developed on a world with multiple apex predator species, so they had to become incredibly efficient hunters to survive. 6 arms, natural armor plating, enhanced reflexes, and pack hunting instincts. They've been the Galactic Council's primary enforcement species for over 2,000 years. But Sarah sensed there was more. But there are some interesting anomalies in their psychology. Hidden deep in their genetic memory are traces of something else. Before they became pure predators, they may have been social creatures. Some xenopsychologists theorize that Krillians originally evolved as protective pack animals, before environmental pressures forced them to become hunters. Sarah considered this information carefully. The galaxy operated on a strict hierarchy based on evolutionary roles. Predator species dominated, prey species served or died, and the rare neutral species mediated between them. Humans had been classified as prey primarily due to their lack of natural weapons or armor, despite their technological achievements and military prowess. "What happens if I testify truthfully?" she asked. "That depends on what the truth reveals," Rodriguez replied. "But if this Vextai really did show affection toward humans, and if that affection was genuine rather than calculated, it could change everything." The implications were staggering. If a apex predator species could form emotional bonds with humans, it suggested that the rigid classifications governing galactic society might be fundamentally flawed. It raised questions about whether the predator-prey dynamic was truly natural law, or simply an outdated system maintained through force and tradition. Sarah made her decision. "Prepare the shuttle. We're going to the tribunal. Captain, I should warn you that testifying in defense of a Krillian could be seen as treason by some factions. There are groups within the human government who believe our survival depends on accepting our designated role as prey, and not challenging the established order." Sarah smiled grimly. "Lieutenant, humanity didn't survive 400 years of wars, plagues, and environmental disasters by accepting what others told us was natural law. We've always been at our best when we refuse to accept impossible situations." As the shuttle prepared for departure, Sarah reviewed everything she knew about human-Krillian interactions. The official records painted a picture of natural enemies, predators and prey locked in eternal conflict. But hidden in the classified files were other stories. Reports of Krillian soldiers showing unexpected mercy. Accounts of complex negotiations where Krillian commanders demonstrated surprising understanding of human psychology. And now evidence of something that the Galactic Council found, even more threatening than human military might. Evidence of genuine affection between species that were supposed to be natural enemies. The trial awaiting her would determine more than the fate of one Krillian predator. It would test whether the galaxy was ready to evolve beyond the ancient patterns that had governed it for millions of years. And Sarah suspected that humanity's future hung in the balance of that decision. The shuttle launched toward the tribunal station, carrying with it the testimony that might change everything. The witness chamber was designed to intimidate. Captain Sarah Chen stood behind a force field barrier, facing the assembled representatives of species that could tear her apart without effort. The Krillian defendant Vextai sat in energy restraints so powerful they distorted the air around her. When their eyes met across the chamber, Sarah saw something unexpected in the predator's gaze: hope. "State your designation and role for the tribunal," commanded High Arbiter Zephyrian. "Captain Sarah Chen, Human Diplomatic Corps representing Earth Colony Command," she replied, her voice carrying clearly through the translation systems. A ripple of disgust moved through the gallery. Several council members exchanged glances that needed no translation. To them, Sarah was simply prey giving testimony about another prey's interaction with a predator. The situation would have been laughable if it weren't so dangerous. "You were present during the Proxima incident," continued the Arbiter. "Describe what you observed regarding the defendant's behavior toward human civilians." Sarah had prepared for this moment, but standing before the assembled might of galactic civilization still tested her resolve. "I arrived during the evacuation phase. Standard Krillian protocol called for elimination of non-combatants to prevent future resistance. Instead, I witnessed Vextai actively protecting human civilians." Protecting? The word came from Council Member Thrix, a spider-like creature whose species had once been prey before evolving venomous defenses. Elaborate on this claim. Vextai positioned her forces between fleeing civilians and incoming artillery. She redirected evacuation routes to avoid combat zones. When her own soldiers moved to eliminate non-combatants according to standard doctrine, she countermanded those orders. Sarah paused, letting the implications sink in. Most significantly, she personally escorted a human child to safety. The chamber erupted in angry chittering and growling. Several predator species representatives rose from their seats, their various forms of natural weaponry extending in threat displays. "Impossible," roared General Kranth, the massive reptilian commander of the hegemony warfleets. "No Krillian would show such weakness. You fabricate these claims to protect your species." But Sarah was ready for this challenge. "I have video evidence recorded by my ship's sensors during the incident." The holographic display activated, showing the chaotic final hours of the battle. The footage clearly showed Vextai's massive form moving through the combat zone with purpose. When Krillian soldiers began executing fleeing humans, Vextai's roar of command froze them in place. The camera tracked her movement as she approached a damaged building, where a small figure huddled in the rubble. The chamber fell silent as they watched the apex predator kneel beside the terrified child. Vextai's 6 arms, each capable of crushing metal, moved with impossible gentleness. She lifted the girl carefully, cradling her against armored chest plates that could deflect plasma fire. The child's fear melted away as she looked up at the alien face, reaching out to touch the predator's scarred features. "This footage has been authenticated by 3 independent sources," Sarah announced. "What you see is a Krillian predator choosing compassion over protocol. Anomalous behavior." General Kranth spat. "Temporary madness brought on by combat stress. No predator forms emotional bonds with prey. With respect, General, that assumption may be incorrect." Sarah activated her tablet, displaying research data that had taken months to compile. "Human xenopsychologists have studied Krillian behavior patterns for decades. We've identified consistent anomalies that suggest your species possesses suppressed social bonding instincts." The accusation hit the chamber like a physical blow. Krillians were the ultimate predators, evolved for hunting and killing. The suggestion that they possessed capacity for affection toward prey challenged everything the galactic hierarchy believed about natural order. "Lies," shouted another council member. "Humans seek to corrupt our understanding of species roles to elevate their own status." But Vextai spoke for the first time since Sarah's testimony began. "The human speaks truth." Her voice carried across the chamber with the authority of an apex predator. I felt something I had never experienced when I looked upon that child. Not hunger, not the satisfaction of a successful hunt. Something else entirely. "What?" High Arbiter Zephyrian demanded. Vextai's 4 eyes never left Sarah's face as she answered. "The desire to protect rather than destroy, to nurture rather than consume, to preserve innocence rather than eliminate weakness." She paused, her massive form somehow seeming vulnerable despite the restraints. "I believe your human word for this feeling is love." The word fell into absolute silence. Love between predator and prey was not just against protocol, it was against the fundamental laws that governed galactic civilization. If such emotions were possible, if predators could genuinely care for prey species, then everything they believed about natural hierarchy was wrong. Sarah seized the moment. The real question this tribunal must answer is not whether Vextai committed a crime, but whether the system that defines her actions as criminal is itself flawed. If predators can feel affection for prey, if natural enemies can become friends, then perhaps it's time to reconsider the foundations of our galactic society. The challenge was issued. Around the chamber, representatives of 47 species grappled with implications that threatened to overturn millions of years of established order. In the center of it all, a human captain and a Krillian predator had formed an unlikely alliance that might change the galaxy forever. The trial was no longer about one predator's fate. It had become a referendum on the future of interspecies relations. The recess lasted 6 hours, but the real deliberations were happening in private chambers throughout the tribunal station. Captain Sarah Chen found herself confined to quarters under protective custody, officially for her own safety. Unofficially, several council factions wanted her silenced before she could cause more damage to the established order. Through her small viewport, she watched ships arriving from across the galaxy. Word of the trial had spread faster than official communications could travel. Representatives from species that rarely left their homeworlds were demanding to witness the proceedings. The implications of Vextai's case had triggered the largest gathering of galactic powers in 3 centuries. A soft chime announced a visitor. Sarah expected a guard or diplomatic aid, but instead found herself facing Dr. Ilara Voss, the renowned xenopsychologist whose research had helped humanity understand their place in galactic society. "Captain Chen, I hope you understand what you've started," Dr. Voss said, settling into the chamber's single chair. Her aged face bore the weight of decades spent studying the minds of alien species. "I told the truth. Sometimes that's all you can do," Sarah replied. "The truth, yes. But whose truth?" Dr. Voss activated a small privacy shield that would scramble any listening devices. "I've spent 40 years studying predator-prey relationships across the galaxy. What you described in that courtroom challenges everything we thought we knew about evolutionary psychology." Sarah leaned forward. "But you've suspected this before, haven't you? Your research on suppressed social bonding in apex predators wasn't theoretical." Dr. Voss smiled grimly. "You've done your homework. Yes, we've seen anomalies. Krillian soldiers showing unexpected mercy. Vorax hunters sparing wounded prey. Even reports of Zenthari death dealers forming protective bonds with civilian populations. But we dismissed these as statistical outliers, not evidence of deeper psychological capacity. What changed your mind? The footage you presented. The way Vextai touched that child wasn't learned behavior or calculated strategy. It was instinctive, protective, nurturing. Those are not predatory responses." Dr. Voss paused, choosing her words carefully. "I believe we're witnessing the emergence of suppressed evolutionary traits, characteristics that were buried under millions of years of environmental pressure, but never fully eliminated. The implications were staggering. If predator species possessed innate capacity for protective bonding, then the rigid hierarchy governing galactic civilization was built on a fundamental misunderstanding of evolutionary psychology. There's something else you should know," Dr. Voss continued. "The Council isn't just concerned about Vextai's behavior. They're terrified of human influence on predator species. You've demonstrated something they thought impossible, that prey can inspire predators to question their nature. Is that such a terrible thing? Sarah asked. For the current power structure? Absolutely. The Galactic Council maintains order through the threat of predator enforcement. If predator species begin forming emotional bonds with prey, if they start refusing orders to eliminate or subjugate, the entire system collapses. A new chime interrupted their conversation. This time the visitor was unexpected in an entirely different way. Commander Zekthor, a Krillian military officer whose reputation for ruthless efficiency was legendary, stood in the doorway. His massive form filled the entrance and Sarah instinctively stepped back. Dr. Voss, Captain Chen, he rumbled, his voice carrying the authority of an apex predator. I come seeking answers. Commander, you shouldn't be here, Dr. Voss warned. Contact with the human witness could be seen as contamination of the proceedings. The proceedings are already contaminated, Zekthor replied. By truth. He moved into the room with surprising grace for such a large being. I watched the footage of Vextai with the human child. I felt something I have never experienced before. Sarah and Dr. Voss exchanged glances. Another Krillian showing signs of emotional response to human-predator interaction. What did you feel? Sarah asked carefully. Zekthor's 4 eyes focused on her with uncomfortable intensity. Recognition. As if I was seeing something that had always existed within me but had been buried. When Vextai touched that child with such gentleness, I remembered. Remembered what? Dr. Voss prompted. My own youngling period. Before the conditioning, before the training that made me into a weapon, I remembered playing with my clutchmates, protecting the smaller ones, feeling joy at their happiness. His massive claws clenched and unclenched. These memories were declared weak, eliminated through neural conditioning. But watching Vextai, they returned. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. If Krillian society actively suppressed natural bonding instincts through conditioning, then the predatory behavior they exhibited might be artificial rather than evolutionary. Commander, Sarah said slowly, how many of your people have undergone this conditioning? All of us. From the moment we reach maturity, we are trained to suppress what you humans call empathy. We are taught that strength lies in domination, that survival requires the elimination of weakness. Zekthor's voice carried a note of something that might have been regret. But what if we were wrong? What if our strength comes not from our capacity to destroy, but from our ability to protect? Dr. Voss was frantically taking notes. Commander, would you be willing to undergo psychological evaluation? If we can demonstrate that Krillian predatory behavior is conditioned rather than natural, it could change everything. I will do whatever is necessary, Zekthor replied. Vextai faces execution for showing the courage to act on instincts that we all possess but have been taught to deny. If her fate can awaken others to the truth of our nature, then perhaps some good can come from this tragedy. As if summoned by their conversation, another chime announced the arrival of a tribunal messenger. The formal notification was brief but momentous. The council will reconvene in 1 hour. All testimony must be concluded before final deliberation begins. Sarah realized they had one last chance to present evidence that might save Vextai's life and potentially transform galactic civilization. The truth about Krillian nature was emerging, but whether it would be enough to overcome millions of years of entrenched belief remained to be seen. The final act of the trial was about to begin, and with it, the test of whether the galaxy was ready to evolve beyond its ancient prejudices. The reconvened tribunal chamber crackled with tension. Word of Commander Zekthor's revelations had spread through unofficial channels, creating factions within the council that hadn't existed hours earlier. Some species representatives demanded immediate execution of both Krillians to prevent further contamination of the natural order. Others called for investigation into the conditioning practices that might have artificially created predatory behavior. High Arbiter Zephyrian called for order, but the chamber remained chaotic. The tribunal will hear final evidence before deliberation begins. Dr. Alara Voss, present your findings. The elderly xenopsychologist approached the witness stand with tablet in hand and 40 years of research backing her conclusions. Honored Council, I have conducted preliminary evaluation of Commander Zekthor's psychological profile. The results are unprecedented. She activated the holographic display, showing brain scan imagery that few in the chamber could interpret, but all could sense was significant. What you see here are neural pathways associated with empathy and protective bonding. In normal Krillian subjects, these pathways show evidence of deliberate suppression through conditioning. In Zekthor, exposure to evidence of natural bonding behavior has begun to reactivate dormant neural networks. General Kranth rose from his seat, his reptilian form bristling with aggression. You speak of reactivation as if it were beneficial. Those pathways were suppressed for good reason. Empathy is weakness. Protective bonding leads to hesitation in combat. Does it? Dr. Voss challenged. Human military psychology suggests the opposite. Soldiers who fight to protect loved ones show greater courage and determination than those motivated only by duty or conquest. Perhaps what you call weakness is actually a source of strength. The chamber erupted again, but this time the voices weren't uniform. Several predator species representatives were arguing among themselves, questioning assumptions they had never thought to examine. Furthermore, Dr. Voss continued when order was restored, I have evidence that the conditioning process isn't perfect. Throughout galactic history, there have been predator individuals who showed anomalous protective behavior. They were typically executed or reconditioned, but their existence suggests that empathetic bonding is natural rather than aberrant. Vextai spoke from her restraint chair, her voice cutting through the debate. I request permission to address the tribunal directly. The defendant has already testified, the arbiter replied. Not as a defendant, as a witness to my own species' true nature. Vextai's eyes swept the chamber. I have lived 300 years as a perfect predator. I have killed thousands of beings, conquered dozens of worlds, enforced the will of the hegemony without question. I believe this was my nature, my purpose, my identity. She paused, and when she continued, her voice carried a weight of conviction that silenced even her harshest critics. But when I looked upon that human child, I felt something that conditioning could not suppress. Not the urge to hunt, but the desire to shield. Not the satisfaction of dominance, but the joy of seeing innocence preserved. In that moment, I discovered who I truly was beneath the layers of artificial programming. And what are you? Asked Council Member Thrix, the spider-like being whose own species had evolved from prey to predator. I am what all Krillians could be, given the choice. A protector rather than a destroyer. A guardian rather than a hunter. A being capable of love rather than only violence. Vextai turned to face the gallery where other Krillian observers sat. I am what we all were before we allowed fear to make us into monsters. The impact of her words was visible throughout the chamber. In the Krillian section, several warriors were showing signs of emotional distress. Their conditioning was being challenged by the simple honesty of Vextai's admission. Commander Zekthor stood suddenly, his massive frame commanding attention. I second Vextai's testimony. I have felt the awakening she describes. The barriers in my mind are crumbling, and beneath them I find not weakness but a strength I never knew existed. This is contamination, General Kranth roared. Exposure to human influence is corrupting natural predator psychology. This proves that humans are a threat to galactic stability. But Captain Sarah Chen stepped forward, her small human frame dwarfed by the predators around her, but her voice clear and strong. General, you're absolutely right. Humans are a threat to galactic stability. We're a threat to a system built on oppression, domination, and the artificial suppression of natural empathy. We're a threat to the idea that might makes right, and that predators can't evolve beyond their programming. She looked around the chamber, making eye contact with representatives from dozens of species. But we're not a threat to individual beings who choose growth over stagnation, cooperation over domination, love over fear. We offer partnership to any species willing to question whether the old ways are truly natural laws or simply choices that can be unmade. The silence that followed was profound. For the first time in galactic history, a prey species had directly challenged the fundamental assumptions of predator-prey relationships and offered an alternative vision of interspecies cooperation. High Arbiter Zephyrian's voice, when it came, was heavy with the weight of decision. The evidence presented challenges core principles of galactic civilization. The tribunal must consider whether to maintain established order or acknowledge the possibility of evolutionary change. There is another consideration, Dr. Voss interjected. If predator species possess natural capacity for protective bonding, and if that capacity has been artificially suppressed, then the current system may be preventing the natural evolution of galactic society. We may be choosing stagnation over growth, fear over hope. The chamber fell into contemplative quiet as representatives grappled with implications that extended far beyond one Krillion's fate. The trial had become something unprecedented, a referendum on whether the galaxy was ready to evolve beyond its ancient programming and embrace a future built on cooperation rather than domination. The final deliberation would determine not just whether Vextai lived or died, but whether galactic civilization would take its next evolutionary step. The deliberation lasted 18 hours, but the real decision was being made in corridors and private chambers throughout the tribunal station. Captain Sarah Chen watched from her quarters as ships departed and arrived in rapid succession. Emergency sessions were being called on homeworlds across the galaxy as species. Leaders grappled with implications that threatened to reshape interstellar civilization. Dr. Voss had spent the break analyzing data from volunteer Krillian subjects. The results were remarkable and terrifying in equal measure. Neural scans revealed that every predator species representative on the station showed signs of suppressed empathetic pathways. The conditioning that created artificial predatory behavior wasn't limited to Krillians. It appeared to be a galaxy-wide phenomenon. "We're not dealing with isolated anomalies," Dr. Voss explained to Sarah during their final meeting before the verdict. "We're looking at evidence of systematic psychological modification across multiple species. Someone or something has been artificially enhancing predatory behavior and suppressing natural bonding instincts for millennia." "Who would do such a thing?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "The same entities that benefit from the current power structure. Think about it, a galaxy divided into rigid predator and prey categories is much easier to control than one where species freely form alliances based on mutual affection and respect." The implications were staggering. If the evidence was correct, then the natural order that governed galactic civilization was actually an artificial construct designed to maintain control through fear and division. The predator-prey dynamic wasn't evolutionary law. It was social engineering on a galactic scale. A soft alarm indicated the tribunal was reconvening. Sarah made her way to the chamber, noting increased security presence and the addition of representatives from species that typically avoided galactic politics. Word of the trial had reached even the most isolated civilizations, and they were coming to witness what might be a historic transformation. The chamber fell silent as High Arbiter Zephyrian took his position. His expression was unreadable, but the tension in his posture suggested the weight of the decision he was about to announce. "The tribunal has reached a verdict in the matter of Vextai of the Krillian hegemony, charged with violation of natural order through formation of emotional bonds with designated prey species." Vextai stood in her restraints, her massive form somehow dignified despite the energy bonds that held her. Her four eyes never wavered as she faced the judgment that would determine her fate. "However," the arbiter continued, "the evidence presented has raised questions that extend far beyond the actions of a single individual. The testimony of Dr. Voss, the psychological evaluation of Commander Zekthor, and the historical analysis of conditioning practices across multiple species has forced this tribunal to confront fundamental assumptions about the nature of predator-prey relationships." Murmur ran through the chamber. This wasn't the straightforward condemnation many had expected. The evidence suggests that the predatory behavior exhibited by designated predator species may not be entirely natural. If this is correct, then Vexitai's actions represent not a violation of natural law, but a return to authentic evolutionary psychology. General Kranth was on his feet before the arbiter finished speaking. "This is madness. You cannot overturn millions of years of established order based on the testimony of contaminated subjects." "Order!" Zephyrian commanded. "The tribunal's investigation has revealed evidence of systematic conditioning programs designed to suppress empathetic bonding across multiple predator species. These programs appear to have been implemented by the galactic hegemony's predecessor organizations over the course of several million years." The revelation hit the chamber like a physical blow. The systematic suppression of natural bonding instincts wasn't recent policy. It was ancient conspiracy that had shaped the development of galactic civilization itself. "Therefore," the arbiter continued, "this tribunal finds that Vextai's actions were not criminal, but representative of natural evolutionary potential that has been artificially suppressed. The charges against her are dismissed. The chamber erupted. Some representatives cheered while others roared in outrage. Security forces moved to maintain order as debates broke out across the gallery. But Zephyrian wasn't finished. Furthermore, this tribunal recommends immediate investigation into conditioning practices across all member species. If natural empathetic bonding has been systematically suppressed, then the affected species have the right to choose whether to continue such practices or allow natural psychological development. Vextai's energy restraints powered down for the first time in days. As she stood free, her eyes found Sarah in the gallery. The look that passed between them transcended species barriers. It was the recognition of shared triumph over forces that had sought to define their limitations. Commander Zekthor approached the witness stand without being called. "I request permission to make a statement on behalf of the Krillian military." "Granted," Zephyrian replied. "As of this moment, I am suspending all conditioning programs within Krillian forces. Any soldier who wishes to explore their natural psychological development will be given that opportunity. Any soldier who chooses to continue current protocols will be respected in that decision." He paused, his massive form seeming to grow even larger. "But never again will Krillians be forced to suppress their capacity for protective bonding in service of artificial hierarchy." The statement sent shockwaves through the assembled representatives. If the Krillians, the galaxy's primary enforcement species, were abandoning their role as unquestioning predators, then the entire foundation of galactic order was shifting. Sarah realized she was witnessing something unprecedented, the beginning of the galaxy's next evolutionary step. The trial that began as judgment of one predator's crime had become the catalyst for fundamental transformation of interstellar civilization. But even as victory seemed assured, she knew the real challenges were just beginning. Entrenched power structures wouldn't yield easily, and there would be those who preferred the old ways of fear and domination to the uncertainty of change. The galaxy was about to discover whether it was ready to evolve, beyond its ancient programming, and embrace a future built on cooperation rather than conquest. 6 months after the trial that changed everything, Captain Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of Unity Station, the first truly integrated facility in galactic history. Through the massive viewport, she watched ships from dozens of species docking together in patterns that would have been impossible under the old hierarchy. Krillian vessels shared berths with human transports, while former prey species worked alongside rehabilitated predators in genuine cooperation. The transformation hadn't been easy. 3 systems had declared independence rather than accept the new paradigm, and the Vorax Collective had attempted military resistance before their own conditioning breakdown led to internal revolution. But across the galaxy, species after species was discovering what lay beneath millions of years of artificial programming. Captain Chen, the voice belonged to Vextai, though she now carried the title of ambassador rather than military designation. The massive Krillian had become the most visible symbol of the change-sweeping galactic civilization. "Ambassador," Sarah replied, noting how naturally the title fit. "How did the council session go?" "Better than expected. The hegemony has agreed to full disclosure of conditioning protocols, dating back 4 million years. Dr. Voss believes we can reverse most of the psychological modifications within a generation." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the impossible sight of natural enemies working as partners. Through the station's hull, Sarah could hear the complex harmonies of multi-species crews coordinating their efforts. Languages that had once been used primarily for threats and ultimatums now carried expressions of friendship and cooperation. "There's something I wanted to show you," Vextai said, activating a portable display. The hologram showed a small human girl playing with a young Krillian in what appeared to be a childcare facility. "The integration programs are working better than anyone expected. The younglings adapt to cooperation much faster than the adults." Sarah smiled as she watched the interspecies friendship developing naturally. "That's Emma Rodriguez, isn't it? From the Proxima incident?" "The same child whose touch awakened my true nature," Vextai confirmed. "She specifically requested to meet young Krillians. She says she wants to help them learn to be gentle." The irony wasn't lost on either of them. The prey species was teaching the predator species how to embrace their capacity for tenderness. It was exactly the kind of impossible reversal that the old system had been designed to prevent. "Have you heard from Commander Zekthor?" Sarah asked. He's leading the rehabilitation efforts on Krylos Prime. Initial reports suggest that 70% of military personnel are choosing to undergo conditioning reversal. They're discovering that their true strength was never their capacity for violence, but their ability to protect and nurture. A soft chime announced another arrival. Dr. Voss approached them with the satisfied expression of someone whose life's work had finally received validation. Sarah, Vextai, I have news that will interest you both. She activated her tablet showing genetic analysis data. We've completed the comprehensive study of predator species psychology. The results confirm our hypothesis. Every designated predator species shows evidence of artificially enhanced aggression and suppressed empathy. But more importantly, we've identified the original architects of the conditioning programs. Who? Both women asked simultaneously. The architects themselves, the ancient species that supposedly transcended physical existence millions of years ago. They never left the galaxy. They've been manipulating its development from behind the scenes, using conditioning programs to maintain a stable but stagnant civilization that they could control. The revelation was stunning but somehow not surprising. The mysterious architects had always been credited with establishing the fundamental laws of galactic civilization. Now it appeared those laws were tools of control rather than natural principles. Where are they now? Sarah asked. Gone. When the conditioning breakdown began accelerating across the galaxy, they finally did what they claimed to have done ages ago. They departed for higher dimensions. Apparently, they had no interest in governing a galaxy of free-thinking, emotionally bonded species. Vextai's laugh was a sound that would have terrified anyone 6 months ago, but now carried only warmth. So we frightened away beings who had controlled galactic development for millions of years, simply by choosing to love instead of hate. It appears so, Dr. Voss confirmed. Fear-based control systems can't function when the subjects refuse to be afraid. Through the viewport, Sarah watched a group of mixed-species children playing together in the station's recreational area. Human youngsters ran alongside young Krillians whose natural armor had not yet hardened. Former prey species children shared games with the offspring of apex predators, all of them laughing, learning, growing together without the artificial barriers that had divided their parents. What happens now? Sarah asked. Now we build something new, Vextai replied. A galactic civilization based on cooperation rather than domination. Partnership rather than hierarchy. Love rather than fear. It won't be easy, Dr. Voss warned. There are still factions that prefer the old ways. Some species are choosing to maintain their conditioning programs. We're going to see conflicts between traditional and reformed societies. But we've proven it's possible, Sarah said. We've shown that predators can choose protection over predation, that prey can inspire rather than cower, that natural enemies can become the closest friends. Vextai placed one of her massive hands gently on Sarah's shoulder, a gesture that perfectly embodied the transformation they had witnessed. The galaxy is learning what one small human child taught me. That love is stronger than conditioning, that choice is more powerful than programming, and that the future belongs to those brave enough to embrace change. As they watched the sunset paint Unity Station in brilliant colors, reflected in the hulls of ships from across the galaxy, Sarah realized they had achieved something unprecedented. They had given an entire galactic civilization the chance to evolve beyond its artificial limitations and discover its true potential. The deadly predator who had faced execution for showing affection toward humans had become the catalyst for the greatest transformation in galactic history, and in the end, it was love rather than fear that had proven to be the most powerful force in the universe. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in millions of years, it was also hopeful. The galaxy was finally free to discover what it could become when species chose cooperation over conquest, understanding over prejudice, and affection over fear. The age of artificial hierarchy was ending. The age of natural partnership had begun.